This is an update on Russian military operations in Ukraine for April 23rd, 2022. I'm going to do like what I always do. I'm going to go over a Pentagon briefing from about 2 days ago. I'm going to supplement that with Russian statements from Russian state media, and I'm also going to include other resources when and wherever useful. But first, let's just take a look at a map so we can see a whole overview of the battlefield. Remember, this map that I'm going to show you live, uamap.com, this is a pro-Ukrainian, pro-Western source. It is included in Twitter's list of, verified and reliable sources, which means it is heavily biased in favor of Ukraine and its Western sponsors. So just keep that in mind. Let's take a look at it. Let's look at an overview. This is Ukraine. This is Russian Crimea down here. And you can see how they have this land bridge all the way to the Donbas region. Here circled in that red line, those were the original boundaries of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, the territory that they held at the beginning of this conflict in late February. And you could see how Russian-controlled territory extends all the way to the northeast, Kharkov, right at the outskirts there. Now, back down to the south, and then we'll work our way around. There is Kherson. This is a city that Russia has held since almost the very beginning of this military operation. And they have been gaining grounds on Nikolaev. And beyond Nikolaev is Odessa. And as I say every update, that Russia is very interested in both of these cities. I would not be surprised if I saw the offensive continue until at least these two cities were taken. They also are venturing further north from this area. If we continue over toward the east, we see Mariupol, and we see Mariupol, except for the Azovstal steelworks, is entirely controlled by Russia. And that is a pro-Western, pro-Ukrainian map admitting that Mariupol is under Russian control, except for a number of Ukrainian fighters trapped in Azovstal steelworks. They cannot get out of there. No one can resupply them. And I will talk about this in greater depth because it's mentioned during the Pentagon briefing. So that is done. Mariupol is done, to the extent that Russian forces involved in operations in Mariupol have been sent elsewhere because they're no longer needed there. Now, if we continue up toward the Donbas region, you're going to see a lot of activity. And if you've been watching this closely day to day, you will see that Russia is slowly creeping out over these heavily fortified lines controlled by Ukrainian forces. If you're watching the footage that is emerging, you will see just how heavily fortified Ukrainian positions are. But these are positions that are being overrun slowly but surely. And they are doing an encirclement of these forces. They will encircle them and cut them off completely. A much larger version of what was just done in Mariupol to great effect. In previous updates, the Pentagon itself has admitted that Russia has been carrying out shaping operations in the Donbas region. You only do shaping operations if you are the one dominant on the battlefield. If you are on the defensive, if you are bungling everything, if you are incompetent, you are not doing shaping operations. You are reacting to the enemy's shaping operations. But the Pentagon itself admits that it's not Russia that is on the defensive, it is Ukraine. They are on the defensive. They are reacting to Russia's shaping operations. And I guess this is a good place to start with the Pentagon briefing. This is the first briefing where I've seen anyone from the Pentagon admit that there is now a major offensive taking place in the Donbas region. That has been gaining gradually in intensity over the last 2 weeks, I would say. There was no start date. It just continuously gathered intensity until suddenly the Pentagon's like, yep, that's probably the offensive underway. So let's just take a look at the transcript right here. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby holds a press briefing. If you go all the way down to the bottom, you can see that there's a video there. So if you don't feel like reading through all of this, you can just watch it. Let me go over some of the major points here. So they acknowledge for the first time that there is a major new Russian offensive taking place in the Donbas region. They also say that in addition to those 18 howitzers they were talking about, they are planning to send an additional 72 155 millimeter howitzers along with 144,000 rounds. And now that sounds like a lot, but according to Russia, this is via TASS, this is Russian state media, since this conflict began, they have destroyed 1,062 field artillery guns and mortars, along with 271 multiple launch rocket systems. So they have been taking out a lot of artillery. Will 72 additional howitzers make any difference if they have actually lost 1,000? You have to think they would have had a lot of them at the beginning of the conflict, and they would not be asking for more if they still had all of their weapons that they started the conflict out with. There's this desperate attempt to resupply the Ukrainian military, specifically because it is losing men, munitions, and machines on a daily basis. The Pentagon always talks about this number of sorties that Russia is flying, over 200 a day. That is a lot of bombs and missiles falling down on the battlefield, destroying Ukrainian equipment. And I want to remind people that these howitzers that the US is sending, and also Canada is sending a number of them, these howitzers are different than the ones that Ukrainians are used to using. So they have to be trained on how to use these. They're getting counter-battery radar systems. They have to be trained on how to use these. This will take weeks, if not longer, to train them on just the basics. And then it takes weeks, if not months, to train military units to use these systems effectively in a coordinated manner out on the battlefield. Otherwise, they're just going out on the battlefield and randomly firing at the enemy the best that they can in an uncoordinated manner, which is going to lead to even more weapons and men lost in this conflict. There's also talk of 121 Phoenix Ghost drones, and very little information is given about these drones. They continuously compared them to these Switchblade drones, which I have not heard anything about. I'm thinking that if they were having even mild success, we would have been hearing about it in the Western media, and I'm not hearing anything at all from the Western media playing up the supposed success of these weapons. Now this Phoenix Ghost drone, I got a Fortune article here. Again, the links to all of this will be in the video description if you want to read the whole article. Meet the Phoenix Ghost, a secretive new drone the US fast-tracked for delivery to Ukraine. So I don't know that it's even been used anywhere else before. It's made by Avex Aerospace in California. And if you go to their website, I mean, it looks like they're into intelligence gathering and reconnaissance. I don't see anything on this website about weapon systems, weapon platforms. There's no information on this. And again, this sounds like wonder weapons. This is what a country does when they're losing a war. They try to think of fantastical weapon systems they think will just turn the tide. And that's the problem with these type of weapon systems. They can only help you improve what you're already doing, but if what you're doing is completely losing, it's not going to help turn the tide. It's not going to do anything to solve the fundamental problems that Ukraine has: a lack of air power, a lack of logistics, a deficiency in trained manpower. All of these problems are chronic and cannot be solved, not with any sort of weapon delivery to Ukraine, and not through any sort of training program short of one that will take months or over a year to perform. You have to remember, the US up until this point has been training the Ukrainian military for years, 8 years actually, and that is what it took to get them up to this level. When these men die on the battlefield or are captured or for some other reason are out of the fight, you cannot replace them quickly. It will take weeks, if not months, if not a year or more to train, especially some of the more specialized or experienced soldiers, especially in leadership and decision-making positions. It's just a reality. This isn't G.I. Joe. Now, I've been talking about claims that Russia has made about destroying Ukrainian equipment, not just artillery pieces and rocket launchers, but all types of Ukrainian equipment. They've also been capturing huge amounts of weapons and equipment. And if you're on Telegram and you're following these channels, Russian channels, be aware that they are Russian channels, so always keep that in mind when looking at the information. They are coming across mountains of weapons and caverns full of weapons. And this one from TASS, again, this is Russian news agency TASS. Russian troops seize huge Ukrainian ammo arsenal in Kharkov region. Russian engineering troops seized control of Ukrainian army arsenal with thousands of tons of ammunition in the Kharkov region. This was on Friday, April 22nd, 2022. They had Soviet-era weapons in there and also more modern Western weapons sent to Ukraine specifically for this conflict. And that is now all in Russia's hands. And we're going to see a lot of this happening. The US is sending these weapons to Ukraine faster than Ukraine can train and deploy them into the field. That is what's happening. And so when Russia comes across a depot or a warehouse or a cave full of these weapon systems, they're going to be sitting there untouched, unused, because Ukraine simply lacks the capacity to employ them on the battlefield. It's exactly like what happened in Syria. The US was sending tons and tons of weapons into Syria for years and years. When Russia entered into the conflict in 2015, began hitting supply lines and warehouses, they were destroying this faster than the US can send it. And then you have the manpower problem. Replacing a weapon system is actually not all that easy, especially the more sophisticated the weapon system is. The Javelin, for example, 32 months from production to deployment. You're taking out all of these weapon systems faster than they can be supplied and faster than you can train people to use them effectively. You can train someone to use a weapon in a day or two, but to use it effectively, where it's going to make a difference on the battlefield, that is an entirely different story. And we watched that play out in Syria for the last 7 years of Russia's involvement there. And we are seeing that play out right now in Ukraine. John Kirby's also talking about this group called the Ukraine Defense Consultative Group. And it looks and sounds a lot like the Friends of Syria group. If you remember that, that was the US, its Persian Gulf allies, and its friends in the European Union. They all got together, and that's what they would do. They would talk about how can we get more militants, machines, and weapons into Syria. They would pressure countries to continuously give aid to these terrorists they were backing in Syria. They would have, these fake pro-democracy politicians come in from Syria. Well, they weren't. They were originally from Syria, but they've been hiding out in Europe for years and years. They would come and show up and give pep talks. And that was a lot like what we're seeing right now regarding Ukraine, this marshaling of support and arms and anything else they can think of to try to help Ukraine through this proxy war that they are fighting through Ukraine. So I thought that was interesting. And again, if it didn't work in Syria, I don't know why they think it's going to work in Ukraine. There's also a lot of questions asked during these briefings. And one of the questions was about President Biden saying that Putin's not going to win in Ukraine. We cannot let them win in Ukraine. And you can see that claim versus what's actually happening on the ground, that they're not adding up. And people in the media see this, and they're starting to become more and more aware that all of this false optimism that they had, manufactured optimism maybe in the very beginning, this is all melting away, and they're having a very harsh wake-up call. And they're asking John Kirby, what are we doing to actually make Putin lose? And he didn't really give an answer, and he had to fall back on what is essentially a lie, that it's up to Ukraine, they're fighting hard, they have stopped Russia at critical junctures. Putin tried to take over Ukraine completely, and he hasn't been able to. So he's had to scale back and focus on the Donbas region. He tried to take Kiev, but he couldn't. And I've already explained in previous videos how that nothing of the sort happened. Russia knows how to take a city. When they want to take a city, they have a 4-to-1 ratio of attackers to defenders. When they arrived outside of Kiev, they had a 1-to-1 or a 1.3-to-1 ratio of attackers to defenders. They were not trying to take Kiev. It's a massive city. It's over 3 million people. It's much bigger, much more built up than Mariupol, and they had nowhere near the ratio of attackers to defenders that they needed to actually even encircle the city, let alone take it. What they were doing was fixing thousands, if not tens of thousands of forces in place around Kiev with a relatively small number of troops so that Russian forces elsewhere in the country could focus on the main objective, which was in the south and also in the east, shaping the Donbas battlefield, taking Kherson and securing it, and also encircling and taking Mariupol, which Russia has already done. And I just want to remind people that President Vladimir Putin, at the very beginning of this operation, never said anything at all about conquering Ukraine or taking Kiev. As a matter of fact, what he said was actually written down in this transcript, Vladimir Putin's televised address on Ukraine, February 24th, 2022. Down here it says, the purpose of this operation is to protect people who for 8 years now have been facing humiliation and genocide perpetrated by the Kiev regime. To this end, we will seek to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, as well as bring to trial those who perpetrated numerous bloody crimes against civilians, including against citizens of the Russian Federation. It is not our plan to occupy the Ukrainian territory. We do not intend to impose anything on anyone by force. Where in that transcript does he talk about taking Kiev? Nowhere. So that was not one of their goals on the outset. They did not array enough troops to achieve that goal. So John Kirby, trying to console these Western journalists, to give them some sort of straw man, you know, oh, they tried to take Kiev, but they couldn't. So you can see that Ukraine has a chance of winning. They have no chance of winning. Russia did not try to take Kiev. And if you listen to some of these briefings, they even talk about the possibility of Russia returning in force to Kiev. So this is part of the propaganda war. This is part of keeping hope alive so that they can continue bleeding not just Russia, but also Ukraine, and bleed them to the very last Ukrainian. There is another question. You have to listen to this question. I don't know who asked this question, but he said, Kherson was a big battle in Vietnam where the US was able to supply surrounded Marines till they were able to succeed in liberating them. Then fast forward to the Bosnian War, where we fly into Sarajevo and the planes would do a move called a Kasani, when they would come in and drop down to avoid ground fire. I reference these points thinking of what's happening in Mariupol, where it's surrounded. How has the US military progressed since the days of Kherson and through Bosnia to be able to supply, should a case come up where the US military is in a Mariupol situation? Are they able to supply them, to relieve them, to provide them ammunition? And the answer is no. The answer is no. The US is so used to fighting peasants in flip-flops that they have forgotten what it is like to face a peer competitor on the battlefield. Russia has advanced anti-air systems. There is no way you're going to fly a Kasani into Mariupol and drop off supplies. There are no supplies coming to the holdouts in Mariupol. They are trapped underground in a steel plant. Even if you could airdrop something on top of the steel plant, they would still have to come out from underground to go and get it. The entire facility is surrounded. If there were American soldiers in that situation, the US would have two options: try to consolidate their forces within the encirclement to try to break out, or summon some force from somewhere outside of the encirclement and break through it from the outside. Something similar happened during the Battle of Stalingrad. The German 6th Army was completely encircled by Soviet forces. They had Erich von Manstein. He was trying to break through the encirclement from the outside, and he failed. And all of those Germans and their Romanian and other allies, they were all trapped. They were all captured or killed. And that's the situation that these Azov battalion or regiment or whatever you want to call them, these Nazis trapped in Azovstal steelworks. This is the situation they're in, an either captured or be killed situation. There is no help coming to them. And again, if you think that Ukraine is winning this war, you have to explain why they haven't been able to summon a military force to break through the encirclement of Mariupol. You need to explain that. That was about it for the Pentagon briefing. I want to continue discussing the situation in Mariupol. There's this from TASS. This is Russian state media. Putin orders to cancel Azovstal steel plant storming in Mariupol and block industrial zone. Putin explained his order with considerations of preserving the lives of the Russian servicemen. This is a case where we must think. That is, we must always think. But in this case, what is more important is preserving the lives and health of our soldiers and officers. There is no reason to penetrate through these subterranean pathways and beneath these industrial facilities. Block off this industrial zone so that a fly wouldn't be able to get out. And this is the smart move. When you have a numerical advantage or you have superior firepower, all of that is negated when you move into an urban zone because your field of fire is now narrowed to an alleyway or a street or by buildings. You are reducing the amount of forces you can concentrate on a target because only so many can get down the street at a single time. This is not like operating out in the open plains of the Donbas region. And then when you go into a subterranean facility, you are talking about space that is even more confined, and you are reducing your numerical advantage even more so, and your advantage in firepower, if not entirely negating it, to the point where if you're talking about moving down a corridor and fighting an enemy in a subterranean facility, you have only a certain number of soldiers that can fit in there at any one time, and it's probably the same number of fighters that the enemy could have waiting at the other end of the corridor. Your casualty rates versus the enemy is going to be very similar. You're not going to have any advantage over them. And so the only thing that a numerical advantage will give you is the ability to just lose many more people and be able to replace them than the enemy. It makes absolutely no sense to fight in a situation like this when you have the facility completely surrounded and time is on your side. And I just want to explain that maybe a little bit clearer. This is the enemy. This is a supporting element. This is suppressive fire. These would be soldiers undercover, firing machine guns, throwing grenades, firing their rifles to keep the enemy pinned down, to keep their heads down, to keep them occupied in this direction. Meanwhile, you would have a separate force because you have numerical advantages. You would move them in on the enemy, and they could fire while this element is moving, and they could hunker down and fire while this element moves. And you could do this with 2 different elements or more. You could do it with more. And if you're out in an open space and you enjoy a numerical advantage, you can do this to great effect. When you're in a corridor, you cannot do this at all. So that is why President Putin has made this decision. It is a sound decision based on reasoning, logic, and strategy. They are not taking into consideration emotions, a need for revenge, or even expediency, rushing to get something done. And rushing to get something done that has no strategic purpose is a mistake. It would be a blunder. It'd be a military blunder to send forces into Azovstal and get them killed in huge numbers when you could just sit there and wait for them to run out of food and water and surrender. What else is going on inside the Azovstal steel plant? Well, according to Russia, the administrative building has been taken, and I've been seeing Ukrainian sources complaining that President Putin said they wouldn't attack Azovstal anymore, but they're still being pounded by artillery and bombs. And that's not what President Putin said at all. He said he will not storm it. He will not order the facility to be stormed. He didn't say anything about not attacking it. They will continue attacking it. And I can guarantee you, even though this has not been said anywhere by anyone, but I can guarantee you that the forces tasked with encircling and securing Azovstal, they will be looking for areas that they can move in with minimum risk to take and secure it, to ensure that fighters cannot move into that area, to tighten the cordon even tighter. There's also this, again, according to Russia, nationalists blocked at Azovstal, not allowed to surrender. And that's not Russia not allowing them to surrender. That is commanders of Ukrainian nationalist battalions do not allow militants blocked inside Mariupol's Azovstal steel factory to lay down their weapons and surrender. That is the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. He said this on his Telegram channel. So make of that what you will. That is according to Russia. So in summation, keep an eye on the Donbas region. This is where all of the action will take place. This is where everyone's eyes are focused now. Even the US is now admitting that there is a major offensive taking place in the Donbas region. And watch as Russia moves over these fortified positions. Eventually, these Ukrainian forces are going to be falling back into fewer and fewer fortified positions. Eventually, they're going to either have to surrender, be destroyed and buried in their fortifications, or be caught out in the open. It does not bode well for Ukraine and 72 howitzers sent by the US that they don't even really know how to effectively use. Yes, they can fire them, but they do not know how to effectively integrate them into the military, and that is something that could take up to a year to do effectively. That is not going to make any difference in this battle. I don't even think it'll do much to significantly prolong it. These Phoenix ghost drones, I guess, keep an eye out for what these things turn out to be. They're being sent to Ukraine. John Kirby was clear to say that they have not arrived in Ukraine yet. So we'll just keep an eye out for that and see what it is. As far as I can tell, they seem more like they would be reconnaissance or intelligence gathering drones. John Kirby seems to be insisting that they have some sort of offensive capability. That does it for this most recent update on the situation in Ukraine, Russian military operations ongoing in Ukraine. I will keep an eye on it. If anything major breaks, of course, I will do videos on it. Otherwise, I wait until these briefings come out. I read over them and I do additional research. And I also try to find statements from Russia so that we can compare and contrast, see what both sides are saying, what they disagree on, what they seem to be agreeing on, to get a more accurate picture of what's going on, because the Western media has not only been lying to their audiences, but when you see them ask these ridiculous questions during these briefings, it seems like they've been lying to themselves or believing their own lies. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. If you're watching this on YouTube, please check the video description below for other places you can find my work. I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Rumble, and I'm also on Telegram. I'm very active on Telegram. Also in the video description are all of the links that I just went over. There's a lot of information there. If you want to read more about the Phoenix Ghost drone, or check the website of the company that supposedly makes it, or if you want to read the full text of the briefing, or watch the video, or go through the entirety of these Russian statements, please feel free. There are also ways you can help support my work listed in the video description below. You can do that through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and through PayPal. And to everyone who has been helping out, thank you so much, whether it's one-time donations or month-to-month, or even if you're just helping share my work or sending kind words and news tips. I greatly appreciate all of that. I could not do this without that support. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.